Jouts, nuch abti, Heisliduch nugwa. Hello, I'm called Ab, and I'm Heisla. And I'm not quite finished with nach yet. So I'm going to switch to a document, and we'll see what more there is to say about this subject. So the first thing is I haven't mentioned what part of speech nach actually is, and it's described as an interjection. So it's kind of an informal part of speech, and the closest definition we can come up with in English is it's sort of like saying gee. So if you think back to the first video I did on this subject, you heard a fluent speaker say nach wathlasu. That means, gee, you're crazy. The next thing I want to talk about is word structure. So we looked at nach kiasu and also nach ganu. So in terms of word structure, nach is what we described as a root word. So it can be used on its own, but it can also have other parts of words added to it. And in this case, we see the word, basically these are suffixes kiasu and ganu. So these are word endings having to do with size. So kiasu means big, and this is described as augmentative. That's the part of speech, or the kind of the linguistic classification. It's augmentative. And ganu is small, so it's described as diminutive. So we see this in other words or phrases like kiasu, which means you poor big thing. And we also have ganu, which means you poor little thing. So you see, kiasu means big, ganu means little. So that's some more information that I wanted to share with everybody. The next thing I wanted to go over is a spectrum or a spectrogram analysis. So this is basically a visual representation of the proper pronunciation. So I'm going to switch to a different program here. So this is Audacity, which I use to record myself. So what we see here is what's called a waveform. And this is kind of a visual representation of sound. And you'll see the shorter waveforms here are quieter. The taller ones are louder. And that's the vertical axis. The horizontal axis is time. So it's measured here in tenths of a second. You can see the ruler up top. Those are tenths of a second. And this is basically volume. These are essentially decibels, which are used to measure volume. And I'm just going to play this, and we'll all have a listen to this. Nach. So this gives you one visual representation of what I recorded. There's other views that we can come up with in this program. So this is the waveform. There's also what they call a spectrogram, and you can view it either by itself, but I'm going to do what we call a multi-view, where we see both of them at the same time. So on the top, we have the waveform. On the bottom, this is the spectrogram. So the way spectrograms work is these brighter parts, these are the more intense parts. The dark parts are the quietest. The white parts are the most intense. And the vertical axis, this is amplitude, which is essentially volume. This is measured in hertz. So hertz they're basically vibrations. So you can see it goes up to 1,000 hertz here, 2,000. I've limited this at 5,000 hertz, just to give you a better view of the actual spectrogram here. So I'm going to play this again, and we'll see both views scroll across at the same time. Nah, nah. So I'm going to play each part individually. So if I highlight this part, you can see that there's a bit of intensity here. There's some quietness here, a little bit of yellow, orange, and purple there. This is basically the build-up. This is the N or N sound. So I'll play just this individual part. So have a listen. So that was very quick, but you can hear that I'm saying So that's the N sound. This next part, there's a lot more yellow. And this is the ah part. This is the vowel. So let's have a listen to that. Nah. Nah. You can also hear there's a little bit of a breath too. Right after I say ah. Let's select a little bit more. Ah. Ah. So you can hear him saying ah. Ah. So that little breath after ah, that's called aspiration. And you can see it looks a little bit different here on the spectrogram than it does on the waveform. You can see there's a better representation of the actual sound there. And then this last part, this is the X or the part. So let's have a listen to that. So that's the part. So if you look at where the X comes in, it looks very different. You can see 3 distinct sections here in the spectrogram that you don't really notice that much in the waveform. So this is the N or the N. This is the ah, and that's the little breath of air, the aspiration after the ah. And this is he. And one thing that you might notice is that this one is a little bit longer. If we play the second time that I said it, take a look at the length of time. Nah. So if I play the first one, nah, and then play the second one, nah. So I said it a little bit faster the second time around. And you can see a distinct difference between both of them, both in the waveform. The second one is actually a little bit quieter. If you look at the waveform here, it's the waveforms themselves don't go quite as high as they do in the first one. So if you're wondering about the most accurate pronunciation, especially with the X at the end, this gives you a really good visual representation of that sound, that part. Let's play that last one again. So it's kind of a hissing sound. Okay, so now I've said everything I wanted to say about nah. And the main point behind making these videos is I've noticed that a lot of people say ne, and I don't really agree with that. I don't really think that's right. In my mind, we should be using the full word, and that's nah. And also take a look at my mouth when I say that. Nah. Nah. You notice my tongue moving like that? My tongue is directing the air out. And it's also coming up towards the back, or kind of around the middle of my mouth. and then it's kind of pushing that air forward. So, na, hi, hi. So that's something you can practice and also listen out for when you hear fluent speakers say this word. Particularly that X or that sound at the end. So hopefully that is helpful for people to learn more about this particular phrase and the proper pronunciation of it. And hopefully this is something you can use to practice. Until next time, I will say, Languathlina, wachekre, exquiguelas, wa.